There's a new good work. I was going to watch that with you guys. It's called Why Are We in a Trade War? Let's watch it.
Citizens of the world, we are at war. I know. And it's the most brutal kind of war. Money war. That's right, folks. Over the past few weeks, financial markets have been in a tornado of turbulence after the US of A fired off hot new rules from our trade policy cannons that have completely turned the globe upside down. And if you're wondering why it was absolutely necessary for us to unleash this economic hellfire onto the world, the answer is, I do not know.
Nobody fucking knows. Nobody knows. There's 7 different answers from 7 different people.
Before 2 weeks ago, I thought tariff was nothing more than the name of my estranged Mormon son. You can come home anytime, buddy. We still love you. But nope. According to Investopedia, a tariff is a tax that one country imposes on goods and services that it imports from another country. By making imports more expensive, countries can use tariffs to achieve certain strategic goals, like getting a trade partner to behave in a certain way, creating a competitive economic advantage for yourself, or balancing your budget. Perhaps most importantly, though, a tariff is something that makes my president and commander-in-chief Donald J. Trump absolutely sprung.
Yep.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Then I was reprimanded by the fake news. They said, what about love, religion, and God? I said, I agree. Let's put God number 1, religion number 2, love, I don't know. We got to put that number 3, I guess, right? And then it's tariff.
Up until this Trump administration, tariffs between...
He's funny. He's funny, bro. He's got jokes. I wish he didn't have any power. She didn't have any power. But he's
between
funny.
the U.S. and other
That's
nations
our guy,
were
all right.
pretty low. I mean, you know as well as me, the effective average tariff on imports coming into the U.S. was 2.5% as of last year. But this year, after a couple of months of foreplay, President Trump's love for tariffs climaxed in a 53-minute orgasm he called Liberation Day, which, if nothing else, is a pretty sick thing to call your orgasm. On Lib Day, Trump proudly held up a poster, Scholastic Book Fair style, that announced massive tariffs on every country in the world, including China, our closest allies, and those freeloading motherfuckers over on Christmas Island. These were some of the highest U.S. tariffs we've ever seen, and after they were announced, the stock market made like a heavy, heavy rock and plummeted. Heavy, heavy rock. Are you guys fucking kidding me with this script? This was followed by a drop in global stock markets, then the U.S. bond market, forcing Trump to back off and announce a 90-day pause on a lot of his beloved tariffs, which for a minute looked like it made the economy happy, but then everyone realized that tariffs were still really high, and also Trump was still tariffing the other biggest economy in the world and one of our largest trading partners in China, at which point the economy basically got sad again, forcing Trump to back off again and say, hey, maybe let's exempt the big stuff like smartphones and electronics from the China tariffs, which made the economy a little bit happy again. But then Trump's Commerce Secretary said that the exemption would only be temporary. Haha, trade war!
Quick update since this video was made. In May, the US and China agreed to cut tariffs to only 10%. But this deal was only good for about 2 weeks until Trump claimed that China violated its agreement with the US and said, quote, so much for being Mr. Nice Guy. The tariffs haven't gone back up yet, but tensions are building up.
What would this say? If the stock market drops 40% in a month, we're in a Great Depression. You'll feel it in a variety of ways, including at the breadline, dude. You'll feel that when 40% in a month would be catastrophe, would be history book level, okay? But, you know, even if you don't own stocks, the stock market dropping, because it is so many Americans' 401k retirement portfolio, makes them feel less wealthy. They feel more concerned about money, so they spend less. They clamp down, which again slows the economy because they're not spending, so people have to start laying people off, jobs start shuttering, businesses start shuttering. That's the effect of the stock market on everyone. Again, so much of our economy has been propped up by the top end of that K, you know, not this. Not the dorm room with the K-shaped economy where a few people have been doing well and most people have been seeing their living standards decrease. This is where the stock market rising was helping the most. As that falls and we have more of like an R-shaped economy and they join everyone declining, that's when it's all over. Because a lot of businesses were propped up by the spending of the top 10%. If this is the top 10%, they've been doing so well and they've been spending so lavishly and going on trips and traveling and buying Airbnbs and helping bid up the housing market. And all of this has kept the economy going. But it's driven by the wealth effect of them having stocks doing well. Once the stock market drops, this last leg gives out and then everything goes to shit. I mean, that was what's holding us up.
There's this whole theory of like international trade and everyone gets richer if everyone kind of does what they're best at. The administration is kind of holding a gun up to that model. This is a potential massive like reordering of the global trade system that's been in place, I think, for about 8 decades.
The order that we now have is one based around broadly free trade, although there are obviously a lot of exceptions to that, relatively low tariffs, and relatively free capital flows between different countries.
Paul Kiernan reports on the U.S. economy for the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, Stephen Kamen is the former director of international finance at the Federal Reserve. And listen, I got a whole stable of nerdy men out back ready to help us out in our time of confusion. So why don't you kick back and relax and let me roll these dogs across your screen, all right?
It's pretty murky exactly what President Trump and his colleagues want to replace that with.
Sorry, I have to respond to this because I don't like this line of thought. So you said in the past 25 years, recessions have bounced back relatively quickly. First of all, I would tell that to people who were impacted in 2009. To them, it didn't feel quickly, okay? I just want to say it like that. But your 2 examples then, we've only had 2 recessions in the past 25 years. 2001, tech recession, tech bubble, and then 2009, housing recession. 2001 did bounce back relatively quickly, but that was mostly not much of a slowdown in the real economy, mostly a slowdown in the big tech stocks blew up, but the real economy was fine. And then 2009, the real economy was hit, but we printed untold amounts of money to get things back on track. The problem we have now is that in 2009, when we printed like crazy, there wasn't inflation. And a large part of that was because we were getting equal deflation from the opposite side by offshoring things to China. That made everything cheaper. So that made everything cheaper as we were printing, and it kind of canceled each other out. In 2025, we have way higher debt. We are on the edge of inflation breaking out at any moment. And to fire up the money printer to bring us out of recession is much harder to do without severe, significant, instant inflation. We're at the end of the rope of like, oh, we'll just borrow and print our way out of it. Now, I'm not saying they won't try to do that. I think they probably will. I'm not saying they won't, but I am telling you that I think the most intelligent thesis around the situation we're in is that it's different. It's not the same as every previous recession you've had in your lifetime. It's much different. And one way to show that is that normally, again, when we're scared of recession and stocks are hurting, the US's borrowing cost gets cheaper and cheaper because everyone floods to US treasuries for safety, but they're not doing that this time. Our borrowing costs are getting more expensive every day while our stock market gets lower. That's rare. That's a divergence that doesn't normally happen. That's a deeper, more substantial, scarier risk. That means real economic pain. That's why I sound the alarm on this so much. That's why I've been talking about it and even repeating myself because I think it's not fully understood. That doesn't normally happen. That's not a normal divergence. Anyway, we'll continue.
But it's pretty clear that President Trump feels that the United States has been ill-served by the system that's developed, since World War II of free trade and free capital flows. And he'd basically like to do his level best to try to bring as much production, and particularly manufacturing, back to the United States through tariffs and whatever other means it takes in order to accomplish that with or without the cooperation of our trading partners.
Now, trying to get inside of the mind of an ardent fan of the musical Cats is pretty dicey, especially when they're the POTUS of the United States. But god damn it, I am business newscaster Daniel Elizabeth Toomey, and I'm gonna try.
I think we have to just take the president at face value when he says that he doesn't like trade deficits, and he doesn't like the idea that all of these countries are selling more to the US than they're buying.
I want to stop here and explain a little bit of this too. Sorry. I think this is really important and worth understanding because this is like the fundamental problem. So if you are the USA and you have the world reserve currency, the dollar bill, in order to be the world reserve currency, you have to have dollars abundant around the world. People can use it to trade goods and services between each other. Like if Saudi Arabia and Europe want to trade oil in dollars with each other, there needs to be a lot of fucking dollars in Saudi Arabia and in Europe, okay? So to do that, one of the things that has allowed us to be the reserve currency and one of the weird trade-offs that we've had is that we have to run trade deficits. We basically give people dollars that we've printed and they give us goods, okay? It's an exorbitant infinite privilege. It's been incredible. We give them money. They give us oil and goods and cars. Now, there is a downside to this. The structural strength of the dollar and this system means that we have to import more than we export, which crushes our own manufacturers. And over the past 30 years, we've seen this. That's the Rust Belt. That's the hollowing out of, the Rust Belt and the loss of manufacturing jobs. All of it gets sent overseas. And all of it is to the benefit of this dollar as a reserve currency. And there's a real argument you can make that the power of the reserve currency to let the government spend as much as they want and print and buy has actually been bad for American citizens. You can make that case. I'm not 100% certain on it, but you can make that case. The problem is what Trump wants is he wants to this up and make it so that we're exporting to everybody. They buy more from us than we have from them, but still wants the dollar to be the reserve. You cannot do that. You cannot have both. The only way for the dollar to be the reserve is for us to be an importing nation. It's the only way. It's structurally impossible. There has to be more dollars out there for this to work. So if he wants both, it will be a disaster. If the idea is that, okay, we're going to get rid of this incredible privilege of having the reserve currency and we're going to revalue our currency to make it cheaper so that American exports are more competitive, or we're going to set up tariffs to bring manufacturing back here. Okay, fine, but it's going to destroy U.S. assets. It's also not going to work, but this will guaranteed happen, and then maybe we'll get some manufacturing jobs. So I just want to be clear, like, this is the scary aspect of this really crazy policy. I'm steel manning it, by the way. This is if it like had a plan. I'm steel man. I'm like, this is like your goal. You want to, I don't think they even understand this. I'm steel manning it, but like, even if they understand this, they have to know that like, you can't have both.
He doesn't like the fact that when he asks why, he gets a list of regulations and blockers and high tariffs that explain why the US isn't selling more to, say, the EU.
President Trump is extremely hot under the collar over the fact that the US runs an overall trade deficit, meaning we buy more stuff from the rest of the world than the rest of the world buys from us.
They ripped off the United States, ripped off and taken advantage of. We've been ripped off. They ripped us off. Ripped us off left and right. But now it's our turn to do the ripping.
Of all the motives underlying...
What a great way to describe it. Let's do simultaneous trade deal negotiations with 75 countries while the president says, we're going to rip you off. That's a good baseline for negotiation, bro.
The fact that the United States buys a lot more from others than they buy from the United States, it's not because we're being cheated. It's not because others are manipulating. It's not because of others have tariffs on our products. Some percentage of it is because of that.
Gregory Zuckerman is a veteran finance reporter also for the Wall Street Journal.
Most of it is just because the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. So by definition, we buy more products from others than they buy of ours. I mean, I have a trade deficit with my supermarket. I buy a lot more of their products than they buy of mine. They're not buying my writing. So, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily cheating me or manipulating me or that we need to do something about it.
Speak for yourself, Gregory. I've been a victim of an unfair trade deficit with my local Kroger for years. And until they start watching this channel, then the bomb threats to their corporate email will continue.
I think the problem is that all of this globalized coordination between countries, that doesn't get my nads going.
Mark Blythe is a professor of international economics at Brown with an unquenchable thirst for rock and roll. I asked him to be my next contestant in understanding the rationale behind President Trump's amazing Technicolor trade war.
Let's think about some of the claims that are being made here.
Oh.
So Europeans have this extra tariffs on American cars. Yes, some of them are bullshit, etc. It's absolutely right. But you know why American cars don't sell in Europe? Because they're crap. Because basically, light truck manufacturer, one of your best sellers is the Ford F-150. You try putting it and driving it on a street anywhere in Italy, and it would get stuck within 5 minutes.
I would love to go on a tour of Florence in my F-150.
Italians don't understand. They don't understand the beauty and the grace of a Ford F-150. It's a lion that's purring beneath you. That feels a bit like jealousy. I think you should be in downtown Prague. The narrow city streets in your Ford F-150 roaring, and a Hummer H2 behind you with the beer in the back.
Most of this stuff is nonsense, just nonsense, and shouldn't be taken seriously.
I mean, a better example, Europe does have a 10% tariff on American cars because they probably would buy some American cars. But Japan is a better example because they keep talking about Japan's tariff that doesn't exist on American cars. There is no tariff. They just don't buy our cars. They just don't do it. They don't want them. They're incredibly good at making cars. They make cars in Japan for Japanese people. They have Toyota. They don't buy cars. And, the negotiations happening right now, the Japan-America trade negotiations, the first big one. Japan is a close ally of the United States, or at least, ostensibly. And this is supposed to be the slam dunk easy trade deal. And right now they're like trying to get Japan to buy, I'm not kidding, American cars and American rice. I can't think of two things Japan wants less. They make cars, they make rice. They don't want. That is not our competitive advantage in Japan, bro. So it's a real tricky situation. Art of the deal, baby. Art of the deal.
Quick update on Japan. Japan and the US are set to talk trade this month. Japan insists that US tariffs are unacceptable, but hopes to reach a deal. But without a deal, a 25% tariff will be placed on Japanese cars, such as Hondas and Toyotas, beginning next month in July.
Beneath a lot of the stuff that shouldn't be taken seriously in this trade war are two issues that folks across the political spectrum recognize as quite serious. One, the loss of American manufacturing jobs, and two, the rise of China.
As other countries like China used their cheap labor in order to increase their manufacturing, that benefited American consumers, but it hurt a lot of Americans, particularly in the industrial heartland. And not only did it hurt those workers, but in putting them out of work, it also led to kind of like the degradation of whole communities.
This degradation of American industrial communities is often referred to as China shock, or the enormous increase in Chinese imports into the United States in the 2000s, which was estimated to have cut more than 2 million American jobs. There's also evidence that in the communities hit hardest by this job loss, more people die of drugs, alcohol abuse, and by suicide, which you'll often hear referred to as deaths of despair.
100%
I mean,
true.
the really big story in the United States role was essentially saying that we are going to allow and partner with China's rise, and we're all going to benefit from that. That was kind of the permissive consensus. That begins to change basically around 2011, 2012. China has such a comparative advantage in manufacturing that they basically bulldoze everybody else. And that is when the trouble begins to hit, because once you get the China shock, this creates concentrated losses in electorally significant districts. Then it persists for a decade and a half. You get deaths of despair, all the bad stuff, and the reaction to that is part of what we're seeing now.
So trying to boost manufacturing at home is a real thing that all sorts of people think we need to be doing. For example, the Biden administration's big pieces of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, were both aimed at bringing high-value manufacturing jobs back to struggling industrial communities in industries that are going to become increasingly important. Building green infrastructure as the global economy tries to decarbonize, and building microchips as everyone uses AI to turn their dick pics into Studio Ghibli flicks. In fact, last spring, Biden himself actually imposed a sweeping set of tariffs on China, targeting $18 billion worth of goodies.
What Trump has done is to basically say, okay, my version of this, it's all in on massive tariffs, and that's going to lead to reindustrialization. So if you think that's the underlying story, and I think it's a reasonable underlying story, are tariffs one part of this? Yes. Are they the only way to do this and the only step, and are massive tariffs the way to do it? Absolutely not. The thinking stops at tariffs.
And lots of folks agree with the mayor of Guitar City here.
The thinking stops at tariffs?
While bringing manufacturing jobs back to hard-hit communities is a worthy goal, just applying a bunch of tariffs isn't going to achieve that. Nevertheless, we continue to crank the tariff amp to 11. That one's for you, Mark. But taking a step back, all of this chaos and uncertainty may actually be hurting the U.S. more than any of the problems we were originally trying to solve.
You're telling me that this chaos and uncertainty might be causing a global repricing in American risk assets, leading to a structural loss of American exceptionalism in the markets? That is crazy. I don't believe it. You know what the problem is? We need to double the tariff.
Those things eventually are going to undermine, I think,
We
the
need to
role
double
of the
the fucking
dollar
tariff.
and the role of the U.S. in world affairs. I have had a lot of conversations with foreign economic officials over the last few months. all of them are completely bemused by the policies being undertaken by the current administration. They don't know how to understand them. They don't know how to predict them, and they don't know how to react to them.
That's right, Steve. Never let them know your next move. And also never let them understand your previous move.
Our reporting suggests that foreign governments and trading partners and allies don't really even understand what's on the negotiating table.
Exactly.
If it's just a case that every year he comes back asking for more and ramping up the tariffs further, it means countries have to reconsider their relationship with the US and start thinking about deepening ties elsewhere. So there are long-term consequences from the trust side of things.
One of the top priorities for Canada, for Mexico, for Europe, for China right now is to figure out how to start de-risking from the United States as much as possible, as fast as possible.
I mean, that is just a well-said way to put it. That's what I'm trying to get at all day today. I was going to save this for my presentation tomorrow, but I'm just going to say it now. If you are playing in a board game with somebody, let's say you're playing Monopoly, and one of the players at the table, when he looks at the board and realizes he's losing, flips the whole fucking board over, knocks all the pieces off the table, and fish it all up. Imagine they do that. Even if you are able to collectively gather all of the pieces and put the board exactly the way it was and get it all back to normal, everybody now has to operate in a different world. They now have to understand that this player is fucking untrustworthy. It doesn't matter, even if you undo everything that's been done, even if you get rid of the tariffs and go back, it's now, you can no longer make a deal under the assumption of trust. The trust is gone. The ability to do any long-term cooperative trading actions is hurt by the fact that you could renege on them at any moment, as you've already done. Again, the deals that he is ripping up, like with, for example, Japan or the EU, are deals that he signed. They're deals that he signed. And it's not just Donald Trump's the one doing it, but they have to now structurally reconsider that they can't trust America. That whether or not he's in power, the idea is that someone else could be, and that America will not honor these previous trade deals, or they will attempt to change the deal when it's in their favor. And so they cannot, in good faith, they have to play the game differently. They simply have to play the game differently. That is a genie you can't put back in the bottle. And that is what we're seeing here. And that is why even like whenever a tariff gets lowered or whatever, you see the market spike a little bit and then resume a downtrend, because there is a structural loss of faith. There is like, I cannot have my assets all in the US market. I can't have my assets in dollars or US treasuries. We need to have our central bank assets in gold or Swiss franc. We have to get out of the system. We don't want to have to rely on it. There's too much risk, because if you give them that leverage over you, it'll be abused. That's what I'm trying to say. And that is why I feel super comfortable saying that this is the worst 100 days of a presidency, perhaps ever. There was a couple examples. There was the guy who was the president after Lincoln got shot. Andrew Johnson, terrible. Could be the worst. And there was William Henry Harrison, who... William Henry Harrison, in his first day in office, gave a speech in the rain with no jacket, caught pneumonia, and 31 days later he died. That's a pretty bad first 100 days. But like in terms of like shock damage to all of America, that's pretty horrendous, man. It's pretty bad. The net economic damage is severe and getting worse. And like to the point where you could undo everything. You could just get rid of all the tariffs and everything and it doesn't matter.
New guy is Brad DeLong, an economic historian and author of Slouching Towards Utopia, a thick old tome that is an economic history of the 20th century. When I asked him about this sticky situation we got our hands on here, he pointed out that the chaos makes it hard to figure out the most basic things, like how real this trade war actually is.
In terms of America's role in the, global trade order, what are the impacts of this trade war that we've seen, that we've already, launched and are in many ways still launching?
First of all, it depends on whether there is actually a trade war, or whether it is the same kind of contest as a World Wrestling Federation match is, that, Donald Trump was in the ring. He went outside the ring. He picked up the chair. He waved the metal folding chair over his head, and he said, I'm going to come into the ring and I'm going to beat you up with the chair. And so the question is, is he going to put the chair down and come back in the ring and have it be a normal wrestling match? Is he going to do it again?
I mean, that's
is he
kind of
going to pick up the chair and wave it around? Either way, we are in substantial trouble. My guess is we're in as much trouble as Britain was after 2016 when they exited from the European Union. But, it might be less, it might be a bunch more.
Meanwhile, the vibes inside of the U.S. right now are frankly suboptimal. Consumer sentiment is plunging, with Americans' uncertainty about the country's economic future eclipsing levels last seen during the COVID pandemic. Both market and anecdotal evidence suggests that the U.S. is not seen as a safe haven for investment that it's been for decades. A role that lets us do fun stuff, like run an enormous budget deficit and build military bases wherever we want. And while some small business owners are celebrating the opportunity that tariffs provide them, others that rely on Chinese manufacturing are starting to panic. Some are even starting to sue. All this for a potentially devastating trade war with a country that's not just going to roll over on this one.
Where does it end? See, China's not actually this little kid that could be punched around anymore. They've been diverting away from the US as much as humanly possible into third country markets. They dominate in green tech sectors. I mean, in the sense of like, bring it, bitch. Let's see who's actually got the cojones here.
Is it almost an impossible task to try and predict where we're going to go from here?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to try to get in ahead of Donald Trump and people around him to anticipate where things are going. Things could turn on a dime. They could cut some trade deals and reassure markets, and we get back to maybe some semblance of normalcy pretty quickly. And yet the average kind of sophisticated investor taking a step back, or economist and such, realizes that we're in a new world and it's uncharted territory. We haven't really experienced.
Yeah, I'm pre-doing my presentation here, but I do want to say this, I'm going to say it again, is that one like through line to all this news lately is that we are really in a new world. And Donald Trump didn't cause this, he accelerated this, but the world that existed post-World War II, like you could almost say Liberation Day is the end of it. We're in a different era. We are now in a new world. Everything is changing, and the next 5 years are going to change. Alliances will change. People that we never thought would work together will work together. Things that we never thought would fight each other will fight each other. We are in an insane new world with a new global order that's yet to be written. It's just interesting. You know, nobody likes living through history, but you don't get a choice. You are going to structurally live through a vastly different, vastly upheaval time, a time where things change very quickly compared to previous decades.
It's an interesting time. It's a stimulating time intellectually, but it's also disturbing and even scary.
Interesting, stimulating, disturbing, and even scary. Normally, that's a quatrain that gets me going, folks. But right now, as our country sets sail into uncharted trade waters, guided by a cats-loving, hip-firing captain of chaos, I gotta admit I'm feeling a little queasy. It's a choppy economic sea we're setting sail into, but all I know is that you and me, throwing up over the bow of this rusty old sloop, CNBC ringing from the loudspeakers on the bridge, seagulls cawing into the air, and the spray of salt penetrating our nostrils? Well, no matter what, I'll be there holding your hair back for every step this ship takes. And that's a promise.
Anyway, good video, good discussion, good interesting stuff.
But there's one final update to this situation. A few days ago, a US court ruled that the White House overstepped by imposing the sweeping tariffs and blocked them. But the White House appealed the decision, which means that the tariffs are still on the table, at least until this case is settled in court.